Welcome to Allegedly Doesn't Replicate, a podcast by the Institute for Replication, where we put research to the test again. In this episode, we talk to Bruno Barbaroli, one of our research scientists here at I4R, about the implications of AI in research. Hello everyone, welcome back to not only to the new episode, but to the new season of Allegedly Doesn't Replicate. I'm here with two very special guests, Abel, as always, my co-host, and we have one of I4R's own researchers, Bruno. Bruno is our AI expert. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Chicago and works for us here at I4R. Bruno, I don't want to take your spotlight, so why don't you introduce yourself and tell people what you do, what the amazing work you do here is all about.
Thank you, Juan. Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit about the work that I have been doing for the past 9 months or so. So, my name is Bruno, as Juan mentioned. I finished my PhD in computer science at the University of Chicago at the end of 2023. And I joined I4R in May of last year. Since then, I have been exploring the use of large language models in order to replicate social sciences papers, and more recently, in order to conduct robustness checks as well. So, in a sense, I'm trying to see if large language models can do both tasks in an efficient way, can actually at some point in the near future surpass what humans can actually do. At this point in time, it's very iffy in terms of how it performs compared to actual humans, but we expect in the near future, just around the corner, uh, for it to actually surpass what humans can do, but with a caveat that just around the corner has been used for self-driving cars for the past 10 years. So it's a unknown,
So
to paraphrase Donald Rumsfeld.
this sounds like scary. Are you taking my job in the near future, Bruno?
Not me. AI will
Not you,
take
yeah,
my
but you are.
job as I'll be unemployed as well.
But I think, the way I think about it and the way I think it's going to shape research in general is you could think of authors once they're done, like, with a specific paper or article, they could run just a program and it basically reproduces their results. Make sure that there's no coding errors, runs sensitivity analysis or robustness checks that are standard for their field, and basically does a real job, like a good job, let's say, at improving the paper, making sure it's computationally reproducible. And this can be done before submitting. This could be done with the journals. So once a paper is conditionally accepted, you can imagine that there's an AI referee or whatever, and that this referee basically computation reproduce, check for coding errors, and all of this. And this is done like in a few minutes. So I don't think it would necessarily like delay papers getting published. Could potentially make our life much easier at I4R. There's a lot of coding errors that are uncovered sometimes where you're thinking like, it was not that complicated or lengthy or time consuming finding this coding error. So maybe a program could have.
Sorry to interrupt. Like this sounds both amazing and scary at the same time. So what is your vision for this? Are you thinking of a tool, like a research assistant of sorts that researchers can use? Or are you thinking something different, like editors like Dr. Lowe that we interviewed before can use to check people's work, or both perhaps?
Yeah, Bruno can answer like about the possibilities here, and I don't think it's like limited to social sciences or public health. I think this could be used. I mean, it needs to be fine tuned, like for each discipline, I would imagine. But I think it could be used in the entire ecosystem of like academia or research. It can be used by referees, can be used by authors, can be used by anyone, the editors, the journals. Like you want to go open source, I think. And is this going to take our job? I mean, I don't think so. I don't think like what we have in mind. Like we're not talking about AI in general. I think we're talking about here, reproducibility, checking for coding errors, that sort of thing. I could see how it could help all the players in the publishing system. Like it doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect and everybody's going to be benefiting from this. Clearly, some people might not. but I think a lot of people in academia would wish to spend less time doing referee reports. We're still going to need referee reports, but I think we might move to a system more similar to what's going on in math or in theory. I mean, talking to colleagues who are more interested in theory, usually they would have two referees. One referee is more junior, PG students, graduate student, just recent, like, AP. That person would go over the proofs and the math.
Mm-hmm.
And the other referee is more interested in the contribution to the literature, where this paper fits, etc. So you could think that we should move into this direction as well for a paper using data for empirics, where you have one referee whose job is to look at the codes and the data and playing with it. And I don't think it's happening right now. I think it should. I find it kind of crazy we're in 2025 and it's not happening. But you could imagine that AI could play that role. A program could.
This is
I don't
super
know, Bruno, do
interesting.
you want to add something?
Yeah, that's exactly what we envision. So AI is going to play several different roles in the entire academic process, like as a research assistant to professors at some level, helping develop code, helping making sure that the code is reasonable, they can be read by other people, because the research could be used by many different like other researchers. So it needs to be able to run in different machines, but also in the review process, as you mentioned. It could be at some point we envision in the near future integrated in the entire review process as maybe a first barrier in order to evaluate the papers being submitted. Check if they can be replicated in terms of robustness checks as well. But also, I recently thought about it in the past couple of days. In the same format, like you can actually have bad actors using AI in order to improve how the data is manipulated and how the data is fabricated in order for it to pass tests that were very difficult to be done in the past. So, in order for the AI to verify if the distribution actually makes sense in real life of the fabricated data, in order for the AI to make sense of if correlation between variables in a higher dimensional space can also be made to be fit to the actually real data. So it's a double-edged sword. Like it can be used both in the benefit of the academic community, but also in detriment of the scientific progress.
Yeah, you could imagine researchers piaking with AI, just, asking just like prompts, like try to make this result statistically significant.
Mhm.
You could imagine this for
But
sure.
also, I think it could open the door to less nefarious ways to look at it. Like, I could see myself committing this mistake, like asking ChatGPT for the academic version of ChatGPT, not to mention OpenAI's work. Hey, I'm interested in this question. Could you explore this, since the algorithm is trained in results that are always significant? It itself trying to find results that are significant and just showing to me the ones that are significant. So even though I, as a researcher, didn't intentionally p-hack the thing, like, because it was trained on the majority of work that it's p-hacked, like let's face it, there's publication bias out there. Like it throwing at me the specification that best shows the relationship, not because it's the best, but it's the one that it thinks it's the best just because it's trained in all of this data. So I could see myself committing the original sin, you know what I mean? But how do you think this is gonna play out in the long run? Like, do you have like a vision of how the new equilibrium is gonna look like? Do you think this is gonna be like kryptonite for researchers, or do you think this is gonna be like improving our productivity by a lot? What do you think is gonna happen?
Well, my first reaction to what you're saying is actually, I think the approach we're taking in order to build the programs that Bruno like referenced at the beginning of the podcast is actually to look at the robustness checks done by reproducers. So I agree that if you look at population of articles, there's publication bias, most results are statistically significant. But it's quite interesting that, we could build algorithms that are based on robustness checks done by a reproducer. And there you see the other way around. Like the results are starting to become statistically insignificant with these robustness checks. But I think the way the data is going to be trained in general for like ChatGPT and so on, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's going to be problems related to just results being generated through different processes, and that unfortunately publication bias and p-hacking, which is what we observe in the data and published articles, is going to just fuel it. It could become really bad. I don't know what Bruno thinks about that.
Yeah, I think it's a very useful tool in terms of like programming, data analysis, and such. But in terms of methodology, I think it still needs to go a long way. And especially there needs to be some guardrails in terms of how it's used and outside of the data analysis scope. And I feel like the academic community will need to deal with that as the time goes because it's such a prevalent tool nowadays. Things will need to evolve, like the procedures and how things are evaluated. And they eventually will. I feel like the academic community is a little bit slow in some ways, but it will catch up in order to account for this new marvelous tool in the toolbox.
I think the thing I'm worried the most about is not actually publication bias and p-hacking. It's paper mills. Like there's these journals that everybody listening to this podcast probably received these spams, but you get spams from predatory journals and fishy journals. I think it's really easy to write papers nowadays. Like the cost of writing a really bad, shitty paper has gone down tremendously. And unfortunately, many universities, just reward this. What they want is just numbers. They don't really care about the quality of journals. So there's already an explosion of predatory journals that has been happening over the past 10, 15 years. I think it's just going to get worse. And I think you could imagine a world where there's an insane amount of bad research out there, but like an insane amount. And that it's going to be incredibly difficult to disentangle good ones versus bad ones. And I think a lot of people in the open science communities are trying to get rid of journals. They don't want journals. They want to change the system. And I think journals, at least, done by top journals that are backed by association, etc., are able to, decide which paper is good and not. And you're going to need a system like this at one point. And I think you're really, really going to need it when we're going to be bombarded by these fake papers that are, or not necessarily fake, but just papers that are written by AI and
without any context of what's happening.
Yeah. I think we'll get.
That's a very interesting point because, like, I don't know if you've been approached, I'm sure you have, by journalists asking about your own personal research of violence, mass shootings and stuff. And these people are, I mean, it's their job to find experts on the matter, and the way they find experts is through papers, through research, through stuff like that. So, and I'm not saying journalists, they are not informed about specific areas because it's not their job, but sometimes what happens is that they are not able to difference between what a good journal is, what a mid-tier journal is, and what a shitty journal is, right? It's very difficult for them because I imagine I go into, I don't know, a field that I know nothing about. Let's say, I don't know, computer science. I go into computer science. I don't know which are the top journals for computer science. So what would happen when this paper mill starts producing papers like it's the end of the world? What is going to be like the bottom line for the average Joe? What is their view of the world? How is he going to be bombarded with different things? We know that a lot of research makes it into the public eye, and it's very difficult for us as the academic community to take back those statements. Take, for example, the chocolate gives you like an amazing life spread or whatever, or the power posing or the stuff like that. Those kind of things embed themselves into the public imaginary, and then it's very difficult to take it back. So how do you think we're going to be bombarded? How should we deal with this? Like, it's the fake news version of academia,
I think, I've received multiple emails of journalists who wanted to report on my work, and they would send me like a summary of what the article that they would release or whatever press release would look like. And then they said, what do you think of this? And then I looked at it, I was like, this looks really bad. Who wrote this? It's like, oh, ChatGPT. And I was like, but isn't it like your job to write this? It's like, oh, we're understaffed. And I was just thinking like, yeah, I get that, but then you're asking me to do your job. And before, you would never have done that. You would have actually read the paper, look at the abstract, etc., and trying to write like something that makes sense. There might be problems, you don't understand the jargon, but I think we're reaching this point really fast. Actually, I think there's a lot of magazines, newspapers, whatever, just going to release information like this really fast, and it's not going to be like, they're not even going to bother sending this to the original authors. I think that's the future, and the future is like, misinformation and trying to figure out like what is real, what is not. And I don't know like how we can help this. I think reproducibility, checking other people's research and so on is really important. I think it is now without AI. I think with AI, it's going to be potentially even more important. So you want really to develop programs, and good AI programs that check what's a good paper versus what's not a good paper. And you're going to need to do this in mass.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we're trying to do at I4R right now is, I think it's somewhat large scale. Like we do hundreds of papers in top journals every year. Like when I tell people like what we do, people think, wow, it's like, it's on a scale that's really large. But when you think about like AI and just like paper mills and so on, like our scale is crazy small. So there's going to be a point where we're going to need to develop programs. So that's why Bruno is on board.
Okay, I just thought of another perspective. Thinking of paper mills, if they all want to, like in computer science, they all want to submit to top conferences because that's going to have the most impact on your career. And they start to submit like hundreds of papers because the barrier to submission is very low. You're going to overwhelm the system. How are you going to review those papers? There are not enough people to do that, especially because the compensation for a reviewer is very low. So you need at least some first automated tool in order to give like a first pass, like an initial check to see if it is actually a legit paper, or at least try to do so in order
You need
to for the
publication
system to.
bias. You're going to need a different type of publication bias.
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah, and so
there's going to be
you
a
don't want to
point
have.
where we're going to need to think about like, okay, publication bias used to be something, and now we actually need it, because otherwise you're just bombarded with a universe of like possible papers, and any type of data is just like, publicly available. There's too much information, there's too many papers, there's too much data, there's too much of everything. So at one point you need to figure out, okay, so out of all of that, actually I'm just interested in like a subset of all of this in a specific field, and that's what we care about. So we're going to have to define new ways to decide what's interesting, what's not interesting, and what needs to get published and what needs to be rejected
That's
or not.
very interesting. That's very interesting because at the end of the day, people think of editors, of course, as the people who select papers and so on. But what you're suggesting is that editors are now going to have not more power, but more discretionary power when it comes to saying what is worth publishing. You know what I mean? Not only in the sense of like it is now, like the research is well done or is not well done, but it's going to be a kind of power where they decide where do we want to take this science. And it's super interesting because the concept we always associate the concept of publishing bias with negativity, like it's bad, but it's kind of leveraging the power of it. Like you're not only gonna get Des rejected, but also like Alexa rejected. You know what I mean? You're gonna get it. So super interesting, and this connects very, very, very well with the type of work we're doing with this paper that we're about to release in I4R about what the paper is about, and the insights, a bit of it about what we find, because I think it connects very well with this idea of how well AI is helping researchers do their job.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the preprint, the decision paper should be out by the time this episode is released. And this is a project we started, oof, I don't know now. I think about a year ago or a bit more. And the idea was, well, we have replication games, so these reproducibility events. And the idea was, how can we include AI into these reproducibility events? And how can we have reproducers potentially being assisted by AI, or potentially having groups that are complete AI like led? They're 100% like just using AI. And that sort of started with like conversations with different people. Ron Alexander, for instance, Alexandru Marcoci. And the idea was really like, let's bring AI to the games. And then we decided, well, maybe the best way to do it would be that we have our typical events. And then when people come to the events, they're researchers, PhD students, we assign them to a team as usual, but we have all the different teams at a specific event reproducing just one or two or maybe three studies. We ended up doing mostly 2 studies per event. So teams are reproducing the same studies, they have access to the same replication package, but we tell each team, okay, are you going to be a fully human team? Are you going to be a AI assisted team, or are you going to be AI led team? And we started doing this. The first event was in February of last year in Toronto, and the last event was late fall 2024. So there's been like, I think, a nice time frame in terms of AI got much better over time, but also people like got more used to using AI. So about a year ago, I was really nervous because we had the event in Toronto like in February, and we needed someone to provide like AI training to people, how to use ChatGPT. And some of you might laugh, like, of course now we know how to use ChatGPT, but like a year ago, I personally had like almost no experience using it at all. So the idea to actually code, looking at someone else's code and just using AI for full reproducibility day, like seem really crazy. So we had David Valenta, who's a PhD student at University of Ottawa, offering these training. So basically, what we had was human teams, as I said, they cannot use AI. We have AI assisted, sort of cyborgs teams where they can use both their human intelligence, like as usual, and also use ChatGPT, and they have access to this training by David. And then we have AI led team, and that was the hardest team to figure out, like, can these teams use only ChatGPT? What can these teams do? Where do we put the line between AI assisted and AI led? Because you want to have a clear demarcation of what can AI led teams do. So you're a team of 3. If you're randomly assigned to AI led, what we told people to do is, well, first you have a training, AI training on how to prompt ChatGPT and trying to figure out like how to reproduce a study. But basically they couldn't really do much by themselves. They had to fully use AIs. For instance, they cannot read the paper, they cannot look at the codes, and they need to do pretty much everything sort of blindly. So they need to write prompts, and the prompts are, well, here's a study, here's the PDF of the article, here are the codes. Can you computationally reproduce table 2, column 4? But you actually don't really know what is column 2, table 4, table 2, column 4, because you've never read the paper. So you're sort of just supporting it and just letting ChatGPT do all the work. So these are like what we call the AI led teams. And the idea was to compare the performance of human only, AI assisted, and AI led, and to have each team looking at 3 different type of, or having 3 tasks, I guess, to do. The first one is, as I said, can you computationally reproduce results? Can you just run the codes and reproduce it? The second one was find coding errors or data irregularities. And the last one was provide and try to implement 2 robustness checks. Not 3, not 5, we need 2. And these were the tasks that the teams had to do. They had a full day. They didn't know the paper they would reproduce in advance. So it was different than the regular games that we do. They start at 9 a.m. They're a team of 3, and maybe they're human, maybe they're AI assisted, maybe they're AI led, but they have the full day and they do as much as possible during the day. And we've done this at 7 events, and yeah, that's pretty much it. And we have results now, I guess.
To me, one of the most interesting things that we find is that, take this with a grain of salt, but AI seems to be like the great equalizer when it comes to coding ability. Like, great coders are great coders, but when you give bad coders the ability to use AI, it seems like they are able to code not at the same rate as human great coders, but at a much better rate. That was very surprising to me. Like the fact that it was a great equalizer. But even more surprising to me, and I would like to hear your take on this, Bruno. Why do you think AI was not able to find errors or perform at the high level at the same rate as humans? Like it was a great equalizer when it comes to time spent at the task, but it was not able to find errors or make the things that humans are really good at, which is, I always tell people that economists are like bloodhounds and we smell blood and we just go after it. It seems like AI is sort of a puppy at the moment, you know? It's not a fully grown hunting dog at the time.
Yeah, before Bruno jumps in, I guess, for people listening who haven't read the paper, which is probably most people, just like here are the key results so that we're just all on the same page, and then Bruno can explain why he thinks we find that, the AI led, like the sort of machine, fully automated, are doing terrible. So I guess, the main result to me, and I don't know for you guys, but is humans are doing really good, doing incredibly good. They are definitely better than AI led at everything by a lot. Like
AI
we're
led is
talking
horrible.
like AI led is doing terrible at everything in comparison to human and cyborgs. But humans are just better at many different things also than the AI assisted, than the cyborgs. Just to give listeners like an idea, like in terms of just being able to run the codes and reproduce the results, like humans and AI assisted are doing something like 60 percentage points better than AI led. Like it's basically AI led cannot even reproduce the results in most cases. AI assisted and humans are doing pretty much the same. In terms of like finding good robustness checks, providing good robustness checks, humans and AI assisted are doing similar. They're doing good. AI led is doing terrible. But the point that you were talking about in terms of coding errors, humans are doing better. They're doing better than AI assisted. And I think that's not something that most of us thought would, that was not our priors. Let's put it this way.
For sure.
But humans, if you have to choose one group, I think in general, like and say that group did better overall, I would say humans did better overall.
For sure.
Bruno, what are your thoughts on why AI led was such a disaster?
So my take on it has to do as so when you compare like the AI assisted and AI led, and the discrepancy, in my opinion, it seems to be when it comes to the prompts. So AI assisted, the human has free will and has the ability of adapt the prompts according to the answer that he or she saw in the previous questions. That leads to ever evolving context and narrowing down to the correct answer that you're trying to find, like reproducing a certain snippet of code or trying to get a robustness check. So having like a completely rigid prompt strategy, which the AI led is more towards, is still not like the ideal scenario for this kind of task, in my opinion. And it might have some in the future. That's how I see things. Or it's going to be more like a AI assisted will converge to be the best form of reproducing a robustness check in the near future. It's going to surpass the human only approach, or but AI led, I don't see for the in the past 2 or 3 years being like the decisive, the best at it. That's why I'm working currently on the project, and we have like a two-step approach. First, we are trying to fine-tune models in order to have the best possible scenario for AI-assisted replications and robustness checks. That's what we foresee in the near future as being the best option and the most useful case for this specific tool, the LLM models. But in the future, we expect to have enough compute power and enough, like the models add the scaling law of using more data and more compute, they will improve significantly. So in the future, I'm not gonna guess how many years there will be a case for purely AI-led replication and evaluation and robustness check of papers being submitted.
I mean, some teams, some AI-led teams actually did good. It's a minority. Like on average, they're doing terrible, let's face it.
Yes.
But some teams actually managed to reproduce the results, find some problems, coding errors, etc. And just, for people listening, like we did choose papers where we knew in advance that there were some minor, at the very least, problems in terms of coding errors. So there were coding errors that could be uncovered. And the papers could all be computationally reproduced. So these papers were basically reproduced at previous regular events. So we chose the paper that way so that teams could actually reproduce the results, find things that are reasonable. It was a data set that was publicly available. It was like, anyway, we had like, it was hard to find these studies that would fit this, but we managed to find a few studies like this for each event. And the other thing that one was mentioning, that which I think is fascinating, is AI assisted team, when you look at them, and you've attended some of these events, Juan, and you've been actually one of the participants at the very beginning. It's quite interesting what's going on in terms of dynamic. Like,
For sure.
having support from AI, to me, I was looking at some teams, I was like, I think you guys over rely on it. Some teams were under relying on it. And I was
Completely
like,
agree.
there's a sweet spot here, and it's not clear what that is, and it's not clear whether teams were about three, so you could have someone using AI, someone not using AI, and someone using a bit, and I think these teams that did this did really well. And one way that we test this, and it's really exploratory, and we don't have a lot of statistical power to test this, but I remember, like, in the paper at one point, we split teams that are AI assisted in two. And it's based on the number of prompts that they've used. So it's below above the median number of prompts used. And again, it's exploratory, but you find that teams that use it a lot, so that they've done, like, really maybe over relying, you could say, or just use it a lot, they're actually okay at finding coding errors. They take slightly less time at computationally reproduce, as you mentioned, like it's an equalizer to some extent, but they're less likely in general to reproduce the results. So I find it interesting that some teams actually are over potentially relying on it, others are under relying, and I think over time this is going to change. I think some people will make the mistake of over relying on AI and will do a really bad job, and some teams, or some, like, labs or whatever, are going to under rely on it. I think it's an interesting tool right now, but you have to be careful not to use it too much or not enough. There are pros and cons to both.
I completely
But do
agree.
you
I completely agree. Like, attending this event, I've noticed that some teams were using it for everything. For everything. What I mean by that is they use it from asking what the paper is about all the way to asking what the errors they think it is. So, of course, AI is very powerful, right? But if you use it when it's not at its best capabilities, it's like having Lionel Messi and playing him at goalie. You know what I mean? Like, it's an amazing tool, right? But you have to learn, if that's the right word to use, or realize where are the great places to use it. For example, I consider myself a good coder. Like, I've been coding since second year of uni, but I realized that ChatGPT is a much better coder than I am, right? So whenever I have to code something that is particularly challenging for me, I ask it, either Copilot or ChatGPT or whatever. But I've realized that ChatGPT is perhaps not as good as me as picking up where potential mistakes come from. And this is something that we talked when we were writing this paper, is sometimes the mistakes, or the hardest mistakes for ChatGPT to realize is a mistake, is when the code is actually good code, right? It's when it's a piece of code that doesn't produce any trace back, but it's conceptually wrong. So, and I gave you this example. For example, we were looking at a piece of code where the authors did a many-to-many merge, right? And the many-to-many merge worked, right? It's an actual piece of code that runs. But conceptually, you shouldn't be running it because you produce duplicates. right? And ChatGPT is perhaps not the best tool to realize that that's a mistake, because it's going to run that many to many merge, and it's going to run, so it's not going to produce a traceback. So it's going to believe that that's the appropriate behavior, right? So I think that's where you as a human need to jump in and conceptually tell the machine that, hey, we're not expecting duplicates. We're not expecting this type of behavior from the data. So I completely agree with your view of over-relying on this stuff and under-relying as well. Like sometimes I've noticed some teams were really struggling to find, let's say, good robustness checks, right? And the ones that asked ChatGPT were able to come up with more creative robustness checks and sometimes even more relevant ones. And then they could just go themselves and running them. But I do believe that they have to find this balance between over-relying and under-relying on this. It's like any tool. Like at some point in research, you can go over relying on code rather than, I don't know, let's say interviews, or over relying on interviews rather than code. It's going to be a tool, a very powerful tool. It's like going to be like the Lionel Messi of research, but you have to know how to use it, you know?
No, absolutely. And you know, maybe I misspoke before, but I think for coding errors that are somewhat complex in terms of major error, clearly teams that rely less on AI were doing better, as you've explained. This is definitely the case. I don't remember necessarily what we find for minor coding errors. I think, you know, ChatGPT is really good for, you know, oh, the path is wrong or Stargaze is wrong, things like this. I don't remember really what we find in terms of minor coding errors, but major, clearly, I think AI assisted teams that didn't use much AI were doing better. So I think I misspoke there, but at one point, Bruno, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I think that part of it of over reliance or under reliance is the fact that it's a new tool. Like people are still learning how to use it in a research context. So I expect it to be to converge to close to optimal in I don't know, a couple of years as people get more used to it as a RA or a co-pilot.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I found the description of the result, so I was a bit off your on spot one. So this is like table appendix 9. So this is like really exploratory, but we did split teams. So AI assisted teams based on number of prompts below above the median, and we find that AI assisted teams that use less AI, they were also less likely to competition reproduce, but they identify more coding errors and they took less time. So I think, you know, what you were saying, one is quite accurate. So in terms of coding errors, not using AI is actually a good idea. But in terms of computationally reproducing it fast, potentially you want to use AI. So it really depends on the type of task. And I don't want to read too much into this. We didn't have that much power to take one of the treatment arm and splitting it in half. But it's quite interesting to see, depending on which task, potentially AI is going to help you. It's going to help you just being faster at some things. Just like, yeah, let's just run the codes. Let's do it quickly. And it's computational reproducing. You can have a look at what's going on and help AI. Whereas if you just do AI fully 100% like AI led without looking at it, then it's a disaster. But I think computational reproducibility with AI actually is AI support is quite nice.
I think one of the messages is that if you're a researcher that has done research their whole life without using AI, and you think to yourself, I'm not going to use it because I've been doing research my whole life without using AI, you're missing on a great opportunity, right? And I had this friend. He's an international master at chess, and he told me this thing, which is, I think, what a great analogy is, that before people had what's the chess engine, Stockfish, I think it is. People were just playing the same variants of chess, and they were good, but they had a clear limit, right? But as soon as people started to not only play against Stockfish, but also train with it, they realized that there were plays that they were not making that made a lot of sense. And they called these players centaurs, like half beast, half machine, half human. And nowadays, chess players, they don't see themselves playing without the help, or training at least without the help of this tools. And I think it's kind of interesting that a discipline like chess that prides themselves on the human knowledge acknowledges that the help of AI or machines is very useful for them. And I think at this point, we're kind of in the same territory as researchers, where some of us would like to stick with our all good ways, like doing research by hand, basically. But it's a very good opportunity, and it's gonna show you paths that you didn't see before. It's gonna save you time. Just be mindful of where and how you use it. But I think the overall picture is good. Is good. I'm very optimistic. I don't know if I'm being a bit naive, but I'm optimistic overall.
I think, one of the things that people could use also is, well, we had like over 100 teams, I think, of about 3 people, and 2/3 of them are AI led or assisted. I mean, we have their prompts, and some of them actually did really well. So I think there's a lot to learn from these prompts. What are the prompts that make sense, that work? What are those that don't work? If you want to computationally reproduce, if you want to find coding errors, if you want to get good robustness checks. I think analyzing those, and anyone interested can get access to our prompts. I think to some extent, I think in the near future, this is where we should be putting a lot of emphasis and time and energy. There's a lot of bad prompts, and there's teams that were just going crazy, wasting hours trying to get it to work, whereas other teams like crack it up really fast, and they were asking the good prompts. They were just successful at what they were doing. I think there's a lot to learn from this. It's a lot of really important and good data.
For sure.
Yeah, and the good prompts we're gonna use to fine tune our own models that we expect to be available in the near future to whoever wants to use them, and they're gonna be used in-house as well for our replications.
That's amazing. I think this is a great point to end our conversation. It has been super enlightening. Like, talking to Bruno is always like mind-blowing to a sense, because of course you know what's going on in AI in the broad terms, like OpenAI is releasing this, Anthropic is releasing that, but you never fully grasp, or at least I never fully grasp the whole aspect of it. And whenever I sit down and talk with Bruno about the research, and with you, Abel, about the implications in academia, like, it starts slowly peaking. Like, I get a glimpse into what it's gonna be. It's really great. Do you have any final remarks for our audience?
No, not really. Hopefully we're not completely doomed as a species, and that AI is not gonna completely destroy our race. Otherwise,
We can always
Are you changing your name
become
to
blue collar workers.
I don't like technology in general, so I'm definitely not a big fan of AI. But I think there's a point where you need to realize that it's too late to come back, and you have to use these tools. You have to try to make it, I think, open source, and you have to try to develop them in a way that is actually useful and good. There are some bad actors out there, and you need to do your best. We can try to I don't know, counterbalance or whatever, counter attack what they're doing. I don't know.
join the
We need to be the
resistance?
police to some extent.
The resistance.
Yeah, exactly.
Progress is inevitable, so I think we just need to try to make the best of it.
For sure. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time, and I hope people enjoyed this first episode of the new season. And stay tuned. It's gonna be like a very interesting season full of interesting topics and guests. Thank you both, and have a nice day. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good one.